Welcome back to Power Lunch Southern Africa with me, Zanele Morrison. President Cyril Ramaphosa has signed into law amendments to Companies Act of 2008 that promote the ease of doing business. And one of these is to impose greater corporate transparency. And today we focus on that transparency being in the earnings gap between the highest and the lowest paid persons in a company. Now, to have a look at this bill that was passed, and I think all aspects, be it the governance aspect a little bit, but mainly also what it means from a social impact, I'm joined by Martin Hopkins, Head of Reward Advisory Services at Bowman's. Martin, thank you so much for joining me. So this really does lie or does feed into what we believe is social and corporate governance that is critical for doing good business in any country. What for you is critical for your clients to pull out of this bill?
Thanks, and good afternoon to you and the viewers. So this puts a lot of power into shareholders' hands to govern or control the governance of pay. So up to now, the governance of executive remuneration in companies has been primarily governed by a report in the annual report, and shareholders vote on it, but they provide what's called a non-binding advisory vote. So if it's below 75%, then the company must consult and talk to investors about what's concerning them, but it's not legally binding. From now onwards, the company must give a remuneration policy, which gives the framework as to how executives are paid. And they then have a binding vote. That has got to be passed by an ordinary resolution, which is a 50% majority. And the directors of the company cannot act outside of that. So there's a lot of power into shareholders' hands. And in terms of all the rest of us who might not be shareholders of these big companies, there'll be a lot of transparency about there's already quite a lot of transparency about what the top executives are paid. But now there's also going to be visibility about what the ratio between the highest and the lowest paid employees of a company, and the ratio between the average of the top 5% of employees or executives and the bottom 5%. So these numbers will be published, and what is a good number, what is an acceptable number, that practice is going to evolve as we see companies report these numbers and we see sectors, what are the ratios in different sectors. So I think a lot of power to shareholders and quite a bit of transparency in terms of the ratio between the top and the bottom.
And there's another aspect to it as well, and I'm not sure if it's included in what you're talking about with the ratio. So we are talking about the gap between the highest paid and the lowest paid employee. But then there's also a part that I'm understanding to speak to the total remuneration that's given to the top 5, and then the total remuneration that's given to the bottom 5%. Why is this important, if you could expand on it?
Yes, so all of those definitions of remuneration and what going to get published in terms of that remuneration is the total remuneration, also broken down into the various components of that. So why it's important is that executive pay consists of a significant portion which is delivered in terms of bonuses and in terms of what people would call share rewards. So share options, share rewards, etc., which create quite a big portion of executive pay. So if companies didn't report on the bonuses and the shares that are delivered, they'd be understating quite significantly what's paid to the top. Because the people at the bottom of the organization, the lowest paid people, tend to get more of their remuneration in terms of base salary and allowances, etc.
But this bill also gives a little bit of power to the court. There's a piece that speaks. There's a piece that speaks to accountability being held much quicker for alleged offences, to directors of companies who are delinquent in the remuneration in the remuneration space. What are the kind of examples where this is relevant?
So the accountability is about any type of delinquent director, so a little bit out of my core focus, but definitely, following the Zondo Commission, etc., where there are all sorts of allegations flying around, I think this act will give the courts and the various authorities more power to deal with delinquency and general bad conduct by directors. And in terms of the accountability for directors, in terms of governing remuneration appropriately, etc., this bill does again give shareholders a lot more teeth to deal with that. So if there's a failed vote, so that resolution doesn't pass on the remuneration report, which reports on everything, then members of the remuneration committee, which are the committee of the board that look at executive remuneration, have to be re-elected to that committee. So if shareholders don't like what they're doing, they can fail to re-elect them. And what's even more draconian is after 2 successive failed votes on the remuneration report, then the members of the remuneration committee have to step down from that committee and not be permitted to be part of that committee for a further 24 months. So that's the so-called 2-strike rule. And there's even a risk of shareholders voting them out of the board completely when they come up for re-election. So this does give shareholders teeth to remove directors that they feel are not playing the game in terms of managing remuneration appropriately, both the total quantum and the alignment with performance of the top of the house, and if they're not then adequately rewarding the work level, the lowest paid people in the company as well. Shareholders can put their hand up and essentially kick out the non-executive directors that are governing that pay policy.
And I've been in many shareholder meetings where the shareholders raise this, but with very little power to actually see something getting done. To close off our conversation quickly, ultimately, to who does this benefit? So it does benefit shareholders, be very clear. Does it also benefit employees in an organization? And what is the key word here? Is it fairness? Is it equity? Is it control over decisions that are basically lopsided when it comes to those who are in power?
So I think it's transparency. So I think it gives the shareholders that are looking after billions and billions of rands worth of our money, everybody that's got pension funds, etc., that they feel that the difficult balance between what do you pay people at the top versus the bottom, and it's not a slam dunk, it's not an easy argument and tons of debate, as you know. I think it will also benefit the most vulnerable levels of business, and you've seen that many South African companies are now publishing what they call their sort of lowest paid remuneration to full-time employees, and several companies now do that, and we're seeing pretty decent numbers like anywhere between 180,000 rand per annum up to 240, 250,000 rand per annum as the lowest number that they will pay even the most junior person. So I think in terms of looking after the lowest paid level, heading towards a so-called living wage, which, by the way, those numbers are much, much higher than the legal minimum wage. So we're seeing the big companies which make good profits and do pay the executives well, starting to look after the most vulnerable and to be able to go towards what one would hope is a living wage for the lowest echelon of a company as well.
Martin, thank you so much. Been really valuable having you to talk us through this bill and to unpack some of the nuances. That's all we have time for. That was Martin Hopkins, Head of Reward Advisory Services at Bowman.